Good evening. 13 people died in crashes linked to a defect in General Motors vehicles, and tonight the government is demanding answers. Chief among them, when did GM know about the defect and what did the company do? Carmakers are required to notify the government within 5 days of discovering a safety defect. CBS News was the first to obtain a service advisory that showed that GM knew about these problems with ignition switches a decade before it announced a recall. That recall of 1.6 million, mostly compact cars, didn't begin until last month. More now from Jeff Glor.
The 27-page order demands names, emails, internal memos, engineering drawings, and more. Everything linked to the ignition defect. 107 questions in all, including exactly how many consumer complaints has GM received? How many lawsuits has GM settled? And the details of each. These typically include confidentiality agreements that are kept secret from the public. Exactly which employees were involved in investigating the problem? And why wasn't a recall issued earlier? The deadline for GM's response, April 3rd. Clarence Ditlow heads the Center for Auto Safety.
What GM has to do is restore the public trust. It has to take a close, hard look at its own system for determining when there's a defect and when to do a safety recall.
Last month, we obtained these documents showing a GM engineer first discovered the defect in 2004. A sudden jarring or heavy keyring can switch the ignition off, cutting power and disabling airbags. A service bulletin was posted to dealers in 2005 in case customers complain, saying there's the potential for the driver to inadvertently turn off the ignition. The concern is more likely to occur if the driver is short and has a large and/or heavy keychain. But the cars kept being manufactured. 13 people died, and no recall until almost 10 years later in 2014. Now, GM faces a maximum $35 million fine from the Department of Transportation. The company made $3.8 billion last year. Massachusetts Senator Ed Markey.
Given the danger which the public was running, $35 million is just a parking ticket. We need a penalty that matches the severity of the harm which is done to families in our country when one of these accidents occurs.
The government is requiring a GM officer to sign the return documents under oath. Yesterday, GM CEO Mary Barra said she's launched an internal review, and Scott Barra said we have much more work ahead of us.
Worth noting that GM volunteered to recall the cars itself. Thanks very much, Jeff.